America's top lawyer just revealed sick thing Mueller just did. When you want to know how to fix a car, you call an auto mechanic. When you know if the special investigator is working against the president, you call legendary lawyer Alan Dershowitz. When the media was going on and on last week about Mueller's grand jury, Dershowitz noticed something very messed up. Mueller impaneled a second grand jury to try and force a trial. Now let me try and explain what Dershowitz was talking about. Apparently Mueller already had a grand jury impaneled in Virginia for the Russia investigation. Before it leaked, he has one in D.C. So why would he do this? The Virginia jury is only a few miles away from the D.C. one. Well, according to Dershowitz, there are not many places in the country where you can find a more left-leaning grand jury than Washington, D.C. 10 Dems for every 1 Republican. Because of this, Mueller has now created for himself the option of deciding where to try anyone the grand jury decides to indict. The petite jury, quote, would almost certainly have a huge bias against a Republican president and his associates in Washington, D.C. In reality, it is ridiculous to have 2 different grand juries for a single investigation. He did not need the D.C. one to issue subpoenas. The Virginia one has that power too. What it means is that they will both not be receiving the full scale of evidence for the case. Do you think Mueller has proven himself to be remotely fair or unbiased in this case? Should he be replaced with someone more suited for the job? This is mind-boggling. Let's take a listen to Alan Dershowitz.
Constitutional picture. The president could have told Comey, you are commanded, directed to drop the prosecution against Flynn. The president has the right to do that. Comey acknowledges that. He says in the statement that historically, presidents have done that to the Justice Department. But in the last few years, we've had a tradition of separation. But that tradition doesn't create crime. Remember also what the president could have done. He could have said to Comey, stop this investigation. I am now pardoning Flynn. That's what President Bush did. In the beginning of the investigation of Casper Weinberger, which could have led back to the White House to the first President Bush on the eve of the trial pardoned Casper Weinberger, pardoned 6 people, and Special Counsel Walsh said this is outrageous. He's stopping the investigation. Nobody talked about obstruction of justice. You cannot have obstruction of justice when the president exercises his constitutional authority to pardon, his constitutional authority to fire the director of the FBI, or his constitutional authority to tell the director of the FBI who to prosecute, who not to prosecute. So let's get out of the weeds and let's look at the big...
But then let me just ask you, Professor, just to be clear, when, according to Director Comey, the president told him, I quote, I hope you can let this go, discussing Michael Flynn, the investigation, you don't believe he was trying to influence or impede any possible or further investigation of Michael Flynn?
What I'm telling you is that even if he did want to impede it, and even if he did impede it, that is his constitutional power. He has the right to say, you will not investigate Flynn. The best proof of that is he could have simply said to Comey, stop the investigation, I've just pardoned Flynn. It's over. My precedent, George Bush. He pardoned Weinberger when Weinberger could have easily pointed the finger back at Bush.
I want to get Jeffrey's take on your argument.
I mean, respectfully, I could not think Alan is more wrong. And the simple response is Watergate. I mean, under Alan's theory... Let me finish, Alan. Let me finish. Under your theory, the president, since the FBI works for the president, he can tell them to do anything they want. Well, in Watergate, the President Nixon and they conspired, they made an agreement to stop the FBI investigation of Watergate. Was that a constitutional authority? No, it was a crime. Several people went to jail, and the House Judiciary Committee voted to impeach President Nixon over it. So, yes, he could have pardoned him, but he cannot obstruct justice.
Well, you're saying impeachment is different than...
Impeachment is political. There's no judicial review of impeachment. You can impeach a president for jaywalking, and nobody can review that. I'm talking about, was there an obstruction of justice? I have to tell you, and I wonder if you would agree with me, Jeffrey, if you and I were called as expert witnesses in an impeachment trial of President Trump, and we were asked the question, has President Trump committed an obstruction of justice by pardoning Flynn, or by firing Comey, or by telling Comey not to investigate Flynn? My answer as an expert on the Constitution would be absolutely not. He didn't commit an obstruction of justice. Now, you, Congress, you can impeach him if you don't like what he did, if you think it's obstruction-ish, or it would be an obstruction if he wasn't the president, but you cannot say it's a crime. It's simply not a crime for the president to exercise his constitutional authority to pardon, to direct the FBI. It wasn't a crime when Thomas Jefferson directed the Attorney General what to do. It wasn't a crime when Lincoln did it. It wasn't a crime when President Obama...
Alan, I think you're coming up with all sorts of interesting hypotheticals, but I think, it is well established that the President of the United States cannot engage in corrupt acts designed to protect his political interests and use the FBI to advance those political interests and obstruct justice. I just think that's so basic.
As long as he doesn't destroy tapes, as long as he doesn't fail to comply with a subpoena, as long as he exercises his constitutional authority, he cannot be prosecuted for exercising his constitutional authority.
I want to bring in Blair.
This is serious, folks. Then if that's the case, why didn't Trump just pardon Flynn? This is this is mind-boggling.